Right, thank you very much, and thank you, Ivan, for that great introduction. I'm going to be talking to you for the next 20 minutes or so about the power of connection. And this is based on a lot of different research that we've done fairly recently. Some of it is global data, and I'll point out when it is, and some of it is South African data, and I'll point that out too. So, first of all, I want you just to think a second, a bit more broadly than just media. Most of us spend most of our days thinking about advertising, paid media channels. We think about that, and that is our world, and that's what we do. But actually, if you think about it from a consumer point of view, brands are the sum of experiences of everybody, what they touch, what they see in store, every single aspect of a brand's presence. And I'm going to quote Jeff Bezos here, who, as you know, founded Amazon. And he phrases it really well, saying in the old world, you spent about 30% of your time building a service and thinking of all the touch points and what you needed to do, and 70% of your time shouting about it. Now, we don't all shout, some of us speak at a normal volume, but his point is that this has now inverted. That actually it's the consumer experience, what they see, what they touch, what they feel, has just as much impact on their brand experience, and can imply future growth or or not for a brand if you do it well or properly. So we do a lot of analysis on what we call touch points. So that's everything from media touch points right through to the retail experience to, for example, in-store staff or whatever. And a global meta-analysis of all of our studies actually shows that of all of the touch points in all of the categories, paid media actually only accounts for about a quarter of a consumer's brand experience and their impact of the brand. The rest of it is all the real life stuff. And real life includes digital. It might be your e-commerce experience, it might be a test drive of a car, it could be dealing with a difficult customer service incident on the phone where you're really frustrated. All of those things have an impact on your view of the brand. And so the touch points there actually account for 75%. So then we dive in a little bit deeper to what this actually means, because I've just been talking general figures here, they're global figures. What does that mean to you in your market, in your category? And here you can see this is based on our Connect studies, our touchpoint studies in South Africa in various different categories. And the categories we have here, retail, finance, automotive, and telco. So you can see that actually the media touchpoints account for different percentages depending on what kind of category you're in. So for retail, it kind of stands to reason here that about 3/4 of the touch points where you're interacting with the retailer, you're touching products, you're looking at the shelves, you're trying to work out what the point of sale is trying to tell you, or what the staff are trying to advise you to buy or not to buy. That accounts for a higher percentage than perhaps in other categories. And we've started splitting out, in our studies, we split out different media channels as well. And so the different media channels obviously have a different impact on the consumer's brand experience too. And some of those, for example, automotive category, digital actually does play a larger role in driving a brand experience. Again, that slightly stands to reason. Maybe if you're looking for a car, whether it's a new one or a second-hand one, you're probably going to do your research online first of all. And you're going to see some advertising. So one size doesn't fit all. So this is like the broad thing I'm making about touch points here. But then also, it depends how you use them. Like everything we do, whether it's media channels or touch point channels, you can have a successful impact or you can have a not very positive contribution. And what we've done is we've plotted the range for each of these types of channels here. So TV ads can have a very positive contribution to brand strength. This is based on about 500 studies, but lots and lots of different touch points within that. TV can also be negative impact. Obviously, it depends on the creative, it depends on the placement. But you can see by far the most important one there that can have the most positive experience in the studies we analysed is actually user experience. Even customer magazines, things which are slightly tailored to your needs and your requirements, and the editorial is focused on you. I think also we can see that, for example, out of home actually can tend to be more negative. Now this is based on the studies we covered, That's not to say that out of home isn't a good channel, because it is, it's an amazing channel. The point is that, for whatever reason, it's generally not used that well. I mean, I still go by posters when I'm, you know, walking around London or whatever it is, and they're things that I can't even read, because it's like a printout that's just been put on a poster. You would have thought people would have got past this now, but unfortunately that's not the case. So the basic rules do still apply. So really, with all of this, how can actually brands break through? What can they do to really stand out? So the first thing we say is we need to start with a central connecting idea. And this isn't what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. My theory on this is that sort of maybe 10 years ago, you started out with an idea, and that was usually a TV idea, and then there was a bit of a scramble to try and figure out how it's going to work in different channels, and usually radio was left to last, and you know, copywriters didn't really know how to write radio, but they muddled their way through. And I think the central connecting idea has to mean a lot more than that. With the multiplicity of channels that we have now, and even digital, you can't really lump together. It's not just like one thing. There are so many different variants of what you can do online and the different social media channels that you really need to think about each one properly and how the idea connects across. And what we've looked at, and this is again another global meta-analysis of all of our cross-media studies looking across all channels and a whole load of different categories, is that we've looked at where there was a campaign that did have a central idea, how positive was the contribution across different brand metrics. And you can see here, I'll just flick through these quickly, that if you have a central idea, you have an above average contribution to brand metrics. So it's a really good idea to have one. Even if the campaign is conceived at the last minute, there really has to be a connecting thought that goes across the different channels. And it can drive all sorts of brand metrics, not only just the awareness, salience metrics, but also, importantly, association. What do you actually want people to think? How do you want to change their minds? How do you want to change their perception of your brand? So it can perform very, very well in that regard as well. And then the other thing, which I think is absolutely vital to remember, is Ivan was talking about, you know, what's the consumer experience here? And remember that, again, 10, 15 years ago, we all saw campaigns in the same way. There was like a command and control idea, right? We'll start with this, then we'll move on to this channel, and then everyone will see the telly, and it'll be perfect, and then it'll be amplified in some other media, and then we'll hear some radio later on, and then it'll be, you know, there'll be a high frequency thing going on here. Actually, now that doesn't really happen anymore. We all have a different experience of every single type of campaign that we see. You might see 4 channels of a campaign, you might see 10 different ones, you might spend a lot more time online and see a whole load of different activity. So how, in your mind, in your individual consumer's mind, is all of this going to hang together? And this is what marketers and obviously all of the agencies need to think about. And we can see that campaigns that tend to have more media channels do perform better. Okay, this is, again, global cross-media studies. But campaigns perform even better when the idea is integrated across the channels. And that doesn't necessarily mean just bunging the same logo on. It has to be more than that. It's having the central idea, but it's having brand cues, associations, things that consumers can keep in their mind and say, that means that brand, I associate that. And remember, because they're not looking for brands, they're not loving advertising and going out there really looking for it. It's what sticks in their mind. So you have to create those associations for them. And they have to be integrated across channels because our experiences of a campaign are now all different. We used to talk about sort of 360-degree campaigns, and that was assuming like a perfect world where everybody was exposed to everything, but it doesn't work like that anymore. And then even better, what you have to do as well is customize it to each channel. So in every market that I work with and I speak to, we're still in a situation, for example, where we're talking about online video and people just put a TV ad online. Now I know there's production costs, I know there's difficulties in re-editing, you know, and in some cases there'll be sound on and sound off, and all of that creates problems. But it has to be customized to each channel, otherwise you're not maximizing its use. And at another extreme, it might be that actually it's not a command and control campaign where you're just showing stuff to people and hoping that they respond in the right way and you know, become more aware or something. Actually, you might have to cope with interaction and use, you know, their channels. growing in some markets like Snapchat, for example, where you actually have, you expect some form of interaction, there's social sharing, all of those things go on. But you have to think about the user experience. So the thesis is like the format is really important as well. Back, it used to be just creative and media were the two things you had to worry about. Now it's the format and what you do with it and what you put on it. So almost defining an objective for your channel, I think, is really important. And yet, keeping it all connected, and obviously so. So it's not simple. We do understand that. If we just come on briefly onto media channels, again, this is another meta-analysis about 500 campaigns that we analysed up to 2014, and then another 800 after 2014. So you'll see the grey bar there is like before, up to 2014, the gold bar is after. So we're just doing like, in recent years, these are the changes that we're observing. And you can see that TV actually does continue to deliver. This is global, by the way, so I know it's not specifically for your market. TV does continue to deliver the most brand impact across all channels, but it is declining slightly. It is declining in terms of its brand impact as other channels come to the fore and start to become more predominant. And as marketers start, and media agencies and creative agencies start to figure out the role that each channel can actually play. You can see that Facebook, for example, is having a much bigger impact than it used to. That's not hugely surprising. But there are other, perhaps slightly more traditional channels like radio that are also performing slightly better as well. And this is their brand contribution against all brand KPIs. So that's a meta-analysis of what we've done. But we thought it was useful to look at what we thought was recent years and then compare it with what was going on in the past. But despite TV delivering the most brand impact, we see here that it is actually quite expensive. So this is looking at the cost effectiveness against all brand KPIs. And actually, it turns out here, and again, this is a global analysis, I realise it might not apply totally in every market, but Facebook is actually the most cost-effective platform in terms of what it's doing. This is another lens that you need to look at things through. Newspapers are less cost-effective than they were. Obviously, I know there are various factors feeding into all of this. So these are things that you need to take into account and to understand. But, and this is the other lens you need to look at this through, despite TV being expensive, obviously, it still delivers the reach. And I know in this market, more so than in some other markets. And so it delivers the highest average reach and the highest level of overall exposure. Interestingly, on the right there, we've looked at the GRPs that each channel can deliver overall. And we've also looked at the average frequency. This may not surprise you, but obviously the average frequency of the TV campaigns that we've looked at, this is South African data, is 19, so a frequency of 19. Radio, again, not probably hugely surprising at 34, because that's how radio works. You can deliver high frequencies on radio to really hammer home your message. But you can see here that TV is still the primary medium. It is really important in terms of reach, but it's not the only story. Size isn't everything. I know that some people would claim that it is, but we did the same analysis on all of our media channels, but this time is per person, so the impact per person. Because all these studies are based on actual respondents. We said, what is the average impact per person, per channel, of all of these studies that we've done? And you can see here, it's surprising in terms of its actual increase and its reach, is cinema, where you have a situation where cinema can deliver huge positive contributions in terms of awareness, well actually all the metrics pretty much. Cinema still remains the only channel where you're not doing anything else. You're not playing around with your mobile phone, you're pretty much concentrating, so you are actually really focusing on the ads, so the impact is going to be higher. Now the downside obviously is the reach is fairly low. So these are all the trade-offs that everyone needs to balance in their minds at the same time. It's the reach, the cost, and the impact per person, I think, is a really important thing. The other one to look at here is POS, point of sale as well. Obviously that can apply to every category, but we know that POS can be an incredibly powerful motivator, not just on awareness, but also on motivation, which is like the whole point of POS, right? So it's a good thing, but we can prove that this actually does apply per person. So that's where we are. My 5 key takeouts then, just to summarise very briefly, are that we do need to look beyond paid media, because that's not the sum of all human experience of a brand. We do need to have a central connecting idea which ties everything together. We need to integrate campaigns, but not in a really obvious sort of silly way of doing everything exactly the same on every channel. You need to make sure that it's customised. You need to look at the role of the channel in delivering the message, and I think that's the one area where probably the industry needs to do much more work. And also, media metrics, all of the basic media metrics are important, but they're not the only thing you should think about in media planning. So that's that, and now I'm going to hand over to Monique, who's going to talk to us about digital video. Thank you.